The air in the arena was electric, not just with noise, but with genuine emotion. This was a homecoming. After months away, the champion, Rhea Ripley, had finally returned. The roar of the crowd was a physical force, a wave of adoration for the woman they called Mummy. She stood in the center of the ring, absorbing it, that trademark smirk of absolute confidence radiating from her. The lights hit her just right, the championship gold gleaming at her waist. She was about to speak, to reclaim her throne, to tell the world what was next. And that's when the music hit. Not hers, a different sound, one that hadn't been heard in this arena for a very long time. The Titantron flashed. Liv Morgan. The entire building fell into a confused hush. This wasn't on the schedule. This wasn't Rhea's rival. This was an old friend, an old partner. Liv walked out, but she was different. The chaotic, vibrant energy was gone, replaced by a slow, hauntingly calm pace. She climbed into the ring, her eyes locked on a visibly confused Rhea. And then Liv smiled. A wide, bright smile. The tension in the arena instantly evaporated. The crowd, assuming this was a show of respect, began to cheer. Liv opened her arms, and Rhea, reciprocating, stepped in for an embrace. The two hugged in the center of the ring, a seeming portrait of sportsmanship. The cameras zoomed in. And then, the embrace tightened. Liv's smile didn't fade, it just froze. It became a mask. Her hand, which had been patting Rhea's back in friendship, slowly slid up, gripping the back of her head. Rhea's eyes shot open, the realization dawning a fraction of a second too late. With a horrifying suddenness, Liv ripped her from the embrace and drove her face first into the canvas. A singular, sickening thud cut through the cheers. And then, silence. The kind of absolute, breathless vacuum that only happens in moments of pure shock. The arena, filled with 20,000 people, went utterly quiet. Liv didn't pause. She didn't celebrate. She methodically, coldly, lifted the limp form of the champion and unleashed a brutal, relentless assault. Referees scrambled, their shouts lost in the new sound, a rising tide of boos and horrified screams. This wasn't wrestling. This felt personal. This felt wrong. The attack was merciless, targeted, and shockingly efficient. When she was finally pulled away by security, Liv didn't struggle. She simply stood up, her face a blank canvas, her gear pristine. She looked down at the wreckage of the champion, then looked out at the crowd, her expression unreadable. She had just hijacked the biggest return of the year, not with words, but with an act of violence so profound it left everyone speechless. This wasn't just revenge. It was a statement. The old Liv was gone. And this new one was terrifying. The moment she passed through the curtain, the chaos of the arena was replaced by a different kind of tension. The backstage area, usually a hive of hurried activity and shouted directions, became a corridor of whispers. Production crew members, grips and camera operators averted their eyes. They didn't know what to make of what they just saw. Was it planned? Was it real? The sheer coldness of the act had blurred the line. Other wrestlers, waiting for their own segments, simply stepped aside. No one offered a word of congratulations. No one offered a word of condemnation. They just watched. Liv walked through the gorilla position, the area right behind the entrance, where the producers and the head of the company watched the show. They too were silent. Their headsets were on, but no one spoke to her. She didn't look at them. She just kept walking, her boots echoing on the concrete floor. She reached her locker room, the name Liv Morgan still on the door from a life she had just publicly executed. She entered, and the door clicked shut, leaving the rest of the locker room to deal with the questions. She had returned, thrown a grenade into the entire structure, and then simply vanished behind a closed door, leaving a vacuum of confusion and a palpable sense of fear. What had she become? On the other side of the building, the scene was one of frantic activity. Medical staff were crouched over Rhea Ripley, flashlights in her eyes, gently probing for injuries. Her fellow faction members, the Judgment Day, were there, but their usual intimidating aura was gone. It was replaced by a baffled fury. They were shouting at officials, demanding to know where security was, why no one stopped it sooner. But Rhea herself was quiet. She pushed the medical examiner's hands away, sitting up on the trainer's table. The physical pain was secondary. It was the why that was eating at her, the hug. That's what kept replaying in her mind. It had felt real. For that 1 second, she had let her guard down. She had seen an old friend, not a threat. Liv hadn't just attacked her body. She had attacked her judgment. She had made her look like a fool on her own night. The champion, the eradicator, who feared no one, had been taken down by a smile. This wasn't a strategic move for a title shot. This was an emotional assassination. As her faction raged around her, Rhea just stared at her own hands, the betrayal stinging far worse than the strikes. She had been made vulnerable, and in this world, vulnerability is a death sentence. Before Liv's music had even faded, the internet was on fire. Phones in the arena, held aloft to capture Rhea's return, had instead captured the betrayal. The clip was everywhere, looped infinitely. The smile, the hug, the attack. It was analyzed, frame by frame, by millions. Why Liv Y exploded, trending worldwide. The digital universe fractured into 1,000 different theories. Some fans were outraged, calling the act disgusting, a betrayal of friendship, a cheap shot of the highest order. They mourned the old Liv, the underdog they had all cheered for. But a new, quieter faction was emerging. They were the ones who were intrigued. They saw the coldness, the precision. They saw the look in her eyes as she walked away. They didn't see a villain. They saw an evolution. They called it the Revenge Tour, a narrative that Liv herself had never once uttered. They filled forums with justifications. They argued that Rhea had taken the spotlight, that Liv had been injured and forgotten, and that this was the only way to be seen again. In a matter of hours, Liv Morgan had become the single most talked about entity in the sport, eclipsing the champion she had left lying in the ring. She hadn't just stolen the moment. She had hijacked the entire narrative. The next day, the entire media landscape of the sport had shifted. The morning after talk shows, the podcasts, the insider websites, no one was talking about Rhea's triumphant return. The sole topic was Liv Morgan's transformation. The pundits were baffled. They had no script for this. This wasn't a simple heel turn, a predictable switch from good to bad. This was a change in character. They dissected her time away. They spoke of the silence, the cryptic social media posts that everyone had ignored. They realized with dawning horror that she had been telegraphing this change for months. No one had been listening. They analyzed the act itself. She didn't use a chair. She didn't use a weapon. She used her hands. She used a hug. She had weaponized trust itself. The commentary became less about the physical act and more about the psychological warfare. This, they said, was a message. It wasn't just to Rhea Ripley. It was a message to the company, to the fans, to the entire locker room. It was a declaration that playing by the rules, waiting for your turn, and smiling for the cameras was over. She had shown them that the most dangerous weapon in an arsenal isn't a steel chair. It's the willingness to do what no one else expects. To understand the strike, you have to understand the silence that came before it. For months, Liv Morgan was gone. While she was recovering, the world she helped build moved on without her. Her name faded from the headlines. The spotlight she had fought so hard to earn, the championship she had held, all of it became a footnote. In its place, Rhea Ripley's star didn't just rise, it exploded. Mommy became a global phenomenon. Every show, every premium live event revolved around her. And Liv just watched. We can only imagine what that does to a person. To sit in the dark, healing from injuries sustained in this very sport, and watch someone else live the life you felt you had earned. It's a quiet kind of poison. It's the feeling of being erased. The commentary and speculation missed the point. They called it revenge for an injury. But it was never about the injury. It was about relevance. The hug was a symbol. It was an embrace of the very thing she had to destroy. She had to kill the old Liv, the one who would graciously share a spotlight, to make room for the one who would take it by force. The public face of Rhea Ripley is one of ironclad dominance. She is the eradicator. She is the leader of a menacing faction. She doesn't feel fear. She creates it. But in the days that followed, for the first time, the champion was silent. She didn't appear on the next show. There was no furious promo, no demand for a match. There was just absence. And in that absence, Liv Morgan's narrative grew stronger. Liv was on the show, not saying a word, just standing, watching matches, her very presence an unnerving threat. This was the unseen consequence. Liv's attack wasn't just physical, it was strategic. She had given Rhea an injury, yes, but she had also given her a doubt. How can you be the dominant, untouchable champion when the entire world just watched you get played by a smile? How can you lead your faction with absolute authority when your judgment is publicly questioned? For the first time, the mommy persona had a crack in it. Liv didn't just take Rhea out. She planted a seed of vulnerability, and she was letting it grow in the dark, knowing that the champion's own mind would do more damage than any physical attack ever could. The following week, the arena was a cauldron of hostility. They waited for Liv Morgan, and when her music hit, the boos were deafening, a unified wall of sound. She walked out with that same unnerving calm. She stepped into the ring and was handed a microphone. For the first time since her return, she was going to speak. The crowd rained down insults, chanting Rhea's name, chanting traitor. Liv didn't react. She just waited. She let them scream until their throats were hoarse. She held the microphone, letting the silence stretch, forcing them to lean in. And then she spoke. Her voice was soft, not a shout, forcing the arena to go quiet just to hear her. She didn't apologize. She didn't explain. She didn't even say Rhea's name. She just said, "For a long time, I waited. I waited for my turn. I waited for permission. I waited for all of you to see me." She paused, looking around at the hostile faces. "I'm done waiting." That was it. She dropped the microphone and left. The simplicity of it was terrifying. She had confirmed everyone's fears. This wasn't a momentary snap. This was a philosophy. This was a rebirth. She hadn't come back to be a hero or a villain. She had come back to be an inevitability. For weeks, the narrative was set. This was Liv's revenge tour. This was a personal vendetta against Rhea Ripley. The entire company, the fans, and even Rhea herself, prepared for a long, bitter war between two former friends. Every analyst predicted their eventual brutal showdown. All eyes were on Rhea, waiting for her response. And that was the entire point. We were all looking at the wrong person. The final shot of the show that night wasn't Liv staring down Rhea. It was Liv, from a dark corridor, staring at a monitor. On that monitor wasn't Rhea. It was the other women's world champion. The narrator realizes, in that moment, what this was all about. The crowd went silent, then erupted, because they thought they were watching a simple, brutal betrayal. They thought the story was about revenge. But it never was. Rhea Ripley wasn't the target. She was the message. How do you prove you are the single most dangerous person in the entire company? You don't challenge the champion. You hospitalize the other champion, the one no one else could touch. You take the most dominant force on the roster, and you break her, not for a title, but to prove a point. The entrance wasn't a return. It was a demonstration. She didn't come back for Rhea. She came back for everything.